Adobe Premiere Pro 2022. It looks something like this. And this video is going to be covering 2022 and 2023 as well. So we're going to, well, there are a number of ways you can open up a new project. You can start off by going to new project. You can open up your project if you've been working on one. You can indeed go to new team project. And there's another option. We can actually open up, or we can create a production. So new and production. Productions are groups of projects, which will all be very similar to one another. We're going to start off using the icon for new project. And unlike previous versions, we get this new menu. Now you can, if you want to, go ahead and give it a title and then hit create. Or just press enter as I've done. This is more or less the work area that you're going to see. We've got the import, which is the area we've been at. We've got export, where we go to actually export or render the videos that we've been working on. Now, one thing to note with Premiere is that every area is highlighted. You see the line around this, which changes as I click in different areas. Those are panels, and these panels are areas where you can work for some kind of purpose. When you're using Premiere Pro video editing, you are trying to tell a story. So the tools that you need to tell the story are all over here. Now, once you've imported a few documents into your project, you're going to have something that looks a little bit like this. You're going to have a project area where you can see all the files, and in fact you can change the way the files appear, so you can make them into a list. Let's go ahead and change these to icon view, and we'll just drag in a new file. Or you can get the files, most of these files here actually come from Adobe. So there is a section called libraries where I have a ton of documents. The ones that I've included are basically Adobe stock. So you can access Adobe stock libraries inside of Premiere Pro. However, for my project, what I want to do is to start editing. Let's double click on a file, and that opens up an area called the source monitor. It allows you to start creating a timeline. Now, you can actually change the way the panels look by going to Windows, and you can change to a different type of panel. So these panels all have their own special uses. We're currently working in the highlighted section. We could change it to editing, and this will rearrange things according to the way that I want them to be rearranged. And we could go ahead and actually go to workspaces, reset, and that will reset it to its original settings. Now, when you're working with the panels like this, the source area is where you would be editing your initial input files. Now, there are two basic ways you can work with, or three ways you can work with Premiere. You can either just use it as a standalone, and then you can use the kind of technique I'm going to show you here. There's an even quicker way of working, which I will show you later, and you can also use it with other software in the Adobe Creative Cloud, for instance, Adobe Prelude. You can use it with software like After Effects and Media Encoder. So in the input section, we would have software like Adobe Audition for editing our audio, Prelude for initial work on video. We might be working with After Effects. Certain features that you'd find in software like Adobe Premiere Pro, you don't find it in Adobe Premiere Pro, you find it in After Effects. You can also use software like After Effects and Media Encoder on the output side after you've finished working with your project. But here we're going to do things inside of Premiere, and what we do here, we're going to create clips. So this video here inside the monitor, beautiful little video, I can go ahead and I could just drag this onto the timeline, in which case it will create a timeline with both the audio, in which case here we have no audio, so we just get a flat line. And here we've got the video. We can increase that size there so we can see thumbnails inside the video. In order to zoom in and out, you can use the # key to zoom in and out. It doesn't do very much with this file because it's such a small piece of media. However, you can also use different mouse and keyboard combinations to scroll in and out. You can also use this little icon here at the bottom to scroll in and out. So plenty of ways of zooming in and out. However, what I want to do is to delete this guy here and to show you another way of adding video to the timeline. You can just drag the video out like that, and you can also drag the audio out like that, and see how the audio and the video are not connected to each other when we do this. But if we just drag the entire thing out, we end up with connected video and audio. The tracks in the timeline are arranged in a logical way. You typically work with the tracks that are closest together, and then you can work with tracks that are somewhat more separated out, and so on and so on. You sort of like match the different levels on either side of this split line, which splits the video from the audio. What I want to do is to cut this little video into an even smaller section, so we can move to an area there and press I, move there, press O. That creates a smaller clip, and if we wanted to, we could actually create a subclip by going to clip and make subclip, and that will create subclip. It's a good idea to name things something sensible. I'm not going to do that through this video because that's going to take a bit too much time, but you could call your clips something sensible to help you remember them, and that's a good way of organizing. If we were to use this guy here, we would end up with a restriction that you probably don't want. So I'm going to untick that box, hit OK, and that actually creates a subclip that we can use in our timeline. And that subclip can be added like so, a little bit shorter. And then we can, if we want to, make another input output. And we could, at this stage, either create another subclip, or we could, in fact, just drag the input, output, video and audio separately if we wanted to, or together into the timeline. We can see here we've got two very important screens or panels. One panel is the timeline, and another panel is the area where we actually see what's on the timeline, and you can see they're very closely connected. Another thing to bear in mind is that your display may be a little bit less, if you don't have as powerful a computer as I do, you might find that the playback is a bit choppy, in which case what you'd want to do is to change the resolution maybe to a quarter resolution, and the playback should be a little bit more advanced. Another thing that is important is we can go into File, Project Settings, General, and you can make sure here that you're choosing the right renderer. Typically, the renderer is going to be your most powerful graphics card. That does really help to speed things up. And that's the video rendering and playback. There are other controls that affect the performance of your system. That is something I will discuss in a different video, and I'll link to that video in the description. Now, we've covered probably the key important areas of working with audio and video, the timeline, the project monitor. It is possible just to drag things straight from the project area into the timeline. You can also drag things from outside, and sometimes this doesn't work very well, but you can drag things from outside of Premiere and drag them straight into the timeline. Sometimes that's not your best option. It can take a bit of time, as you saw right there. However, let's take a look at another way of working with multiple clips. Let's say you had a video that had different patches in it, and you wanted to split that video up into individual patches. So what we could do is, before I can actually work forward, what Premiere is telling me here is that the clip does not match the sequence settings. So every time I put things into the timeline, we have to create what's known as a sequence. And that sequence is going to match the media here that you drag into the timeline first. Since I have different types of media, what happens is that I could change the sequence settings to the new media, or I can keep the existing ones. I want to change them, and that will mean that we're now using the settings for this piece of media as the main settings for the sequence. The sequence will appear up here, and it will appear as a project or a sequence, basically, that we can shut down just by clicking there. And it will also appear in this area here, and it has a slightly different appearance to other sequences or to other files in the area here. So we see the small splash segment, the subclip that I created earlier there, that has a different appearance, a different icon. We have the original piece that I worked on, and that goes up there. And we then have, I think we have this guy here, which is the one that I created using the files that you were seeing just now. Now that one is its own sequence, and it will appear up here as well. So you can move between different sequences, and sequences are your main workhorse inside of Premiere Pro. But what I wanted to do was to actually demonstrate something that I was going to talk about just now. What we'll do is to zoom out using the / key. And you may be wondering, how do I know the keyboard shortcuts? Well, a couple of things to know about keyboard shortcuts before we go on. If you go to edit, we go to keyboard shortcuts, we can see the keyboard shortcuts here. Maybe a little bit different on a Mac. The menus may be slightly different on the Mac. Here you can see the keyboard shortcuts that I'm using on my system. They may be a little bit different to the ones on your system. You can edit them here, and you can always come here and reference the shortcut keys here so that you can remember. For instance, the razor tool is C, the slip tool is Y, the rate stretch is R. The really important ones here, we've got V, which is the select tool. The other one is the track forward select. We also have the track backward select, which is Shift and A. We have the razor tool, very important one, C. And these other tools here, you can change all of them if you want to. You can change every single one of them to whatever suits you. I've done a few changes, and one thing to bear in mind is when you are using keyboard shortcuts, typically they will work on a specific panel. So this panel here has got keyboard shortcuts associated with it, and these include the C for the cutting tool, etc. Now the tools are actually here, and this is the razor tool. You can see if I hover over it, we can see razor tool C next to it. That's the selection tool, and that's called V. That's the V keyboard shortcut. So a lot of information available when you hover inside of Premiere Pro, when you hover over an object. The important thing to remember is the keyboard shortcuts can change their behavior depending on which panel. Very simple demonstration of that is if I'm here and I press the tilde key, Google it. Google the tilde key. It'll be in different places in different keyboards. The area that is outlined will maximize to cover the entire screen. If I'm here, that area is maximized. Here, that area is maximized. So the keyboard shortcuts will respond in a different way depending on which panel is actually highlighted and active. That's important to remember. Let's use one of these keyboard shortcuts to create a shortcut. So we're going to scroll through, and we've got some changes that are occurring in the video so I can demonstrate. We're going to use C to bring up the razor. We'll cut, we'll go over here, we'll cut again. And I want to demonstrate a way of creating clips that you might not have seen before. We'll click on this clip here. It does have sufficient changes in it that it should be detected. We'll right click and we choose Scene Edit Detection, and we can select all of these. Analyze will use artificial intelligence to actually identify places where the scene changes so much that the AI believes that that was a cut inside of the clip. So what you'll see now is there is a cut just there. And yes, indeed, there's a change in the video that I made there. So that scene analyzer, that scene detect, is a really useful tool if you're working with complete videos and you need to cut them down into individual clips. Once the individual clips are in the timeline, you can move them and they will snap together as long as this button here is selected. And we select that using the shortcut key S. If you don't want that active, just get rid of that and they will not magnetize in the standard way. Now, when working with audio and video, sometimes you want to temporarily disconnect audio and video, so we can reduce the size of a clip just by moving these handles at the end. We can also hold down Alt option, and that will affect just the audio or just the video. So that's useful for creating techniques known as J cuts or L cuts, which are a little bit beyond the scope of this video. Another thing to bear in mind is that you can also change the intensity of a particular clip. Let's say I wanted this clip to be on top. Now, what I can do is to open this guy up. You can see we actually have a volume control here. So if I turn that down, the volume is now pretty much off for that clip. And we've cranked up the volume to maximum using this slider. There's a similar slider that we can actually do that with the video. So if I come to this clip here, right click and choose show clip keyframes, we can choose motion, opacity, or time remapping keyframes. We'll choose opacity. And what happens is that we get this little handle here, and this little handle changes the opacity of the individual clip. That's just one way of changing opacity. There are other ways of changing the opacity of clips. But if I wanted to fade one clip into another one, I wouldn't normally use this guy here to change the opacity. I would usually use a transition. You want to make sure that you're using the right transition. You can go to the effects panel and we can choose video transitions, and we can then go into fades. The easiest way to find the fade would be to maybe go to dissolve and choose something like additive dissolve. Let's drag this here. And what that does is that it introduces a little transition. If I zoom in, you can see the additive transition. We can change the additive transition or the additive dissolve. And what will happen is that the video will turn bright white, and then it will fade into the other clip. So those transitions, there are lots of them, and you can choose whichever one makes your video look awesome. Now, I think the other thing to mention is that we can create transitions by clicking, control clicking, say in the audio section, and then dragging the controls so that we create what are known as keyframes. So we can go from an area where the audio is fairly loud, we can make it a lot quieter. That's another way of doing transitions, and that sometimes gives you an enormous amount of control, because you can have basically pinpoint control as to what happens to the volume as you're working. Now, let's say you have created your timeline. We could, for instance, move everything back to the beginning, so we've got a solid line at the top there. We haven't got any spaces intruding on our edit. Next, what we can do is to export. So I'm going to choose File, Export, Media. And what I would usually do is to make sure I'm actually targeting a specific sequence. And the easiest way to do that, I find, is to go to the project panel and then choose my sequence, and then right click the sequence and choose Export Media. So that way I know I'm exporting exactly the sequence that I want to export. So if I wanted to export this particular sequence, we can now do it. The in and out points can be set even in the export panel. So I can export a shorter duration of the clip, like so. And then you have these individual settings here for your export. Now, my preference is to export inside of Media Encoder, but that's something we'll tackle in a different video. You can set your settings here. So match source is a very good option. We can go down here and choose, say, H.265, which is slightly better than H.264. Choose audio and video, and then we can hit export. I would say a better option is to click send to Media Encoder, and that usually does a slightly better job of processing the video output. If you've got a powerful graphics card, you can get very, very quick renders. If you're just using the CPU, sometimes the renders can take quite a bit of time. But once you hit export, it doesn't take too long as long as you've got a really decent graphics card. Guys, that is a brief introduction to the Premiere Pro 2022 program. I hope you found that useful. I'm probably going to be working on a longer video for the software to give you more insight into how it works. If you're interested in that, check the description. I'll have the link there once that's ready. But thanks for making it this far. I hope you found that useful, and I'll see you guys in the next video.